Hello there, glorious sporting carnage, wild unpredictability. This week has had plenty of that. That's just these two on the golf course before we even get in.
I know what you're talking about. I was good at the golf course.
To the Champions League. Europa League to get into as well, with Arsenal and Chelsea progressing. But we have to start with Peter Walton and Sid Lowe in the house, illustrious company. And the reason we brought them here is to get into the aftermath of City and Spurs. They think it's all over. The Sun
very good.
Summing it up very nicely. Fernando Llorente centre stage, of course, his hotly disputed winner. Did it come off the arm? Well, Pep Guardiola post-game saying, I support VAR, but maybe from one angle, Fernando Llorente's goal is handball. Maybe from the referee's angle, it is not. Former Spanish referee Iturralde Gonzalez, who's very busy on Spanish TV as a pundit, had this to say. It hits his hand first, then his hip, and the UEFA instructions are clear. You can't score if it hits your hand, even if it's involuntary. It doesn't matter if the elbow is tight to the body. If it happens to a defender, it's not a penalty. But if it's an attacker, it has to be disallowed. Rossetti has told the UEFA referees they didn't play the referee Sakir the view from behind where you can see it hits the elbow. The error from the VAR is not showing the two key images. Manchester City are out because the VAR wasn't used properly. Remember, that's former Spanish referee Iturralde Gonzalez. Gab Marcardi with a Q&A, one of those Q&A sessions where he answers his own questions.
Oh, great.
There you go.
On the subject of why the referees didn't get the angle, Sakir realised as soon as he saw the replays that the ball struck Llorente's arm. The part of the equation was never in question and additional angles weren't needed. What did matter was whether Fernando Llorente's arm was in a natural position, and it was. He couldn't have tucked it in any closer to his body. And what the material impact was on what happened next, and that too was minimal. There's a lot to unpack there, and a lot to digest. Peter, let's go to you first. Noted professor of anatomy, I believe you are, Peter Walton. I know you weren't initially sure where that ball had gone in. I think you even said the knee initially. But
wrong.
But now, 24 hours later, what's your view of the whole incident?
Right. So, firstly, what we've got to discover is, was it a handball? And it doesn't matter what angle you see it at, there is that one angle that shows you the ball has hit his arm before it hits his hip to go into the goal. So the referee has the decision to make. If he'd seen that angle, and I don't think Kahir, the referee, saw that angle, so that's one element to discuss. The other element is, well, was it a handball? I don't think it was a handball. I don't think it met the current criteria. I don't think it was a deliberate act. I don't think that the arm moved towards the ball. He certainly wasn't making himself bigger because his arm was tucked in. So if it had hit his arm, I still don't think that would have been a handball, and I think the goal should have stood. Now, let me just follow up very quickly. The fact that the Spanish referee is saying that there should not be a goal scored with your arm, he's quite correct. However, the goal wasn't scored with his arm. The goal was scored with his hip. So, therefore, that goal was a good goal.
Oh, Peter. I love you. I do. And I appreciate the hard work that you put in. However, let's start with the fact that, let's make it a yes or no question. Did the ball touch the arm, yes or no?
Yes, it did.
Okay. And did that touch on the ball have a material effect on the outcome of the play? Yes or no?
Yes, it did.
And so at this point is when I would say, if I were a lawyer and we were in a court of law, I rest my case. Because if indeed it had a material effect on the outcome of the play, and it's a handball, and it ends up in a goal, how is this not overturned by VAR?
OK, well, let me just come back on that, because you're quite right in saying that has a material effect. That material effect is in law from the 1st of June, not at the moment. The lawmakers have made that specific. So that phrase you've used there has a material effect, comes into effect next month, not the game last night. So the game last night was being played as the law is written and interpreted at the moment. And at the moment, that is not a handball.
So then again, I go back to an initial question. So if the ball had gone into the goal of his arm, you are saying that that should have stood?
No. Had the ball gone directly into the goal, off his arm, that would not have stood, because the interpretation is that you cannot score a goal directly with your arm or your hand. And that's the point in case. It wasn't scored directly with his arm or hand.
Right.
Now, the law changes from the 1st of June to take into account what actually happened yesterday with Llorente.
Okay, fantastic. But the thing that I don't think anybody can argue is the fact that Spurs, Llorente, whoever, in this case is involved in the play, gains an advantage from using his arm, whether he intends to or not. The fact that it hits his arm and he changes the direction of the flight of the ball, it changes the play. And so therefore, that material effect that we're talking about leads directly to a goal. Whether that's June 1st or now, the way I look at it is the arm played a part into the goal. How is that not a handball?
OK, so, again, if you just take it from... cut it up in slices, the first thing is to detect whether or not it's a handball. And we've had this argument many times about you're saying, well, it's not deliberate, it's just hit him, he didn't mean to do it. That's exactly what Llorente did yesterday. The ball came over from the defender, from Company, he didn't see it, he didn't have time to move his arm out the way, his arm was tucked into his body, it was not a deliberate act of handball. So, therefore, it couldn't have been a handball.
Mm. That's why. Look, it's all about interpretation. When I saw it live, I thought hands down handball. Mm. And then when I see the replay and I look at it, and I was thinking from
handball or no. Bottom line, was it a handball? In your money?
It was a handball, but the interpretation is whether he meant it. If you look at Llorente, he's trying to angle where the ball's coming out. It's just about to miss Company's head.
So bottom line, goal or no goal?
Goal. If I've scored that goal and it gets taken back, I'm very disappointed.
Here's the part that is frustrating for me, and whether this is Manchester City or Spurs, I don't care. Whoever feels the grief here, I'm just suggesting that we're now getting to the point where we're asking the referee to be a physics professor, where we're going to have to interpret what the ball flight might have been had it not touched the arm, and therefore could it have been something that maybe would have been not a handball or not a goal, or had that ball gone in one direction or the other direction. The truth is first of all, he needs to be shown the correct replay, and that is unacceptable. Right. Whatever Gab just wrote there doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
We all agree with that.
So he ought to be shown the correct replay, and then after that, we cannot leave it to now where all of a sudden trying to guess as to what the ball flight might have been, as to what the reaction of the ball might have been. Did it touch the arm and did it change direction? And to me, once you see the right angle, it is very clear that it touches the arm and it changes the direction of the ball flight. And at that point, it impacts and it makes a difference as to what the outcome of the play is. See, it's a handball.
This is where the interpretation comes in. I disagree with Ali insofar as when his arm was tucked in and it hit his arm, there was no motion from the player to make that ball go any other way than just drop onto his hip. There was not, the ball didn't go forward, there was no movement with his arm, it just went down, hit his hip, went in the back of the net. If I score that goal, I want it to stand.
Right, but I can sit here and say, well, if it doesn't touch his arm, it hits his gut and the ball falls straight down. So if we're going to play this game of what might have, could have happened, should have happened, and this physics as to what the reaction and the angles would be, then it's a never-ending conversation.
We'll never know the answer to that. If it doesn't hit his arm, then what happens? We will never know that.
Exactly.
We'll never know.
Exactly.
Peter, what's your understanding of why the referee was called over to VAR? If the communication was clearly that it had hit the hand along the way, what was he looking at?
Well, he's looking to see if it's a deliberate action, first of all, and he's also making sure that everybody realised that it was his decision. It was such a pivotal moment in the game, a huge decision, and it's quite right that the referee should be seen to be making that decision based on his own judgment and not on somebody else's judgment. And therefore, he did the right thing in my mind, going over to look at the monitor just to make sure. And yes, whether or not he was fed the right feed or not, he made the last decision, and the audience has seen that as the case may be. And that's why he went over.
Sid Lowe has been waiting very patiently in the wings. Sid, wonder what your reaction was, and generally, if you could give us some sort of indication of the reaction in Spain to Llorente's winner.
Right, I mean, I say this as someone who's English, but someone who's English and lives in Spain, and I found it very interesting watching the response to the introduction of VAR to the Champions League over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And the reason I say I found it interesting is because we've been through all of this for the last 6 months in Spain. Obviously, the Premier League hasn't had this, and so some of the problems that we're starting to unpick as the season goes on are the kind of things that are now being confronted by people in other leagues as well, in this case, people who normally watch the Premier League and of course, watch the Champions League. The response to this has been that I think there's been a sensation in Spain that, look, this could be given, it couldn't be given, it's interpretive. I think that the whole problem, of course, with interpretation is interpretation in itself kind of justifies any decision and at the same time doesn't really justify any decision. And I'm curious as well, and perhaps Peter can help answer this, that this rule change from the 1st of June, which says that anything that involves the hand and becomes a goal, that will no longer stand. I take it to understand, the way I read it anyway, what Iturralde González is saying about this circular from UEFA is saying that although that rule officially comes in force in June, we effectively want to apply that now. That's at least how I read this. And so there does seem to be a slight... kind of a slight difference in terms of how we're judging that. And all of this brings us back to this question of interpretation. It's problematic. And you start wondering if... Do we need to just put a rule in place that says if it hits the arm in any circumstances, it's a handball? If you didn't mean to do it, if it's purely accidental, tough luck, it's a handball. I'm starting to think that that's the only way around this, and that will lead to a lot of decisions that feel unfair, but I suppose we've already got that.
Peter?
Yes, I think Sid, you're quite right there in terms of that circular that's going around. But the circular that's going around was born out of a goal, I think, scored by Kanchelski at Arsenal and Burnley a couple of 3 years ago, where the ball inadvertently hit his arm and went into the goal. It was the only goal of the game, and it caused such a fuss. And UEFA, quite rightly, have said we do not want goals scoring, inadvertently or not, by use of the hand or the arm. And they sent that circular out. And that's preluded the actual law changes that's happening on June the 1st. However, it didn't go the distance of saying, and if the ball comes off the arm, then strikes another element of the body, such as Llorente did last night with his hip, then that goal should be chalked off as well. It only says if the ball goes directly into the goal by the use of the arm or the hand, and in fact it didn't last night.
Does it use it, Peter? Sorry, does it use the word directly? Does it actually say directly?
Yeah. If it goes into the goal directly by the use of the arm and the hand.
Peter, one last thing from me. If I were Tunachak here and I had been in the position that he was in and seen the replays that he was shown, I would have come out with the same interpretation that he had, because clearly he was not shown the angles that the rest of the world was shown for some crazy reason. Now, if you had been in that position, wouldn't you have liked to have seen every angle available to you so that you could make an informed decision?
Yes, and in fairness, the Irati, the Italian VAR, by the way, is extremely experienced VAR, he would have taken the broadcaster's feeds, and that's all he can look at. And those broadcaster's feeds would have or could have included the angle that we've seen from behind the goal. I don't know if that was a broadcaster's feed or not. The assumption is that, in fact, that was not a broadcaster's feed and therefore didn't form part of the VAR protocol in terms of looking at it. It was something subsequently found. If it had been a broadcaster's feed, then I'm afraid the VAR system was a letdown there last night, because he should have been showing that angle. But I do think that Irati, the VAR, hadn't got that angle that we've seen to hand when he sent the decision down to the on-field referee.
All right, Peter, great stuff. Thanks ever so much. That Gab Marcotti Q&A session, he asked the questions and answered them himself. You can read it.
That's quite arrogant.
ESPN FC.
Quite pretentious.
He ties it all up in a neat bow. So a good night for Arsenal and Chelsea, albeit in very different fashions. It seems like City and Spurs didn't have a monopoly on 4-3 games this week. Chelsea 4-3 at home to Slavia Prague. Arsenal, though, very comfortable. Lots of questions for them heading in. They will go through to meet Valencia, who beat Villarreal. Chelsea will play Eintracht Frankfurt, who beat Benfica on the away goals. Paul, few eyebrows raised at Unai Emery's team selection. Pretty attacking, given they had a 2-0 lead to defend in Naples.
Yeah, I think the simple fact that he played this attacking formation, he tried to get a goal to put the tie to bed. more or less did that. Some, you know, calm moments, really. There was nothing much in the game. Napoli were absolutely dreadful. Arsenal was interesting when Ramsey went off that he didn't go to Ozil. He went to Mkhitaryan, so maybe he doesn't trust him in those type of big games, which was an interesting aspect, but never really in any trouble.
So now, Sid, I'll bring you in on this. It sets up Arsenal and Valencia in that Europa League semi-final. Give us a sense of just how dangerous Valencia are. What sort of threat do they pose to the Gunners?
Well, let's try and put Valencia's season into context by saying that about 3 months ago, the coach was on the verge of being sacked. And yet they've just been beaten 2 weeks ago, which is their only defeat in, I think it's 21 games now. Even during that bad run, they weren't getting defeated. They were drawing loads of games. They're one game away from a La Liga record for number of draws. They were finding their way through in two-legged ties. They're in the final of the Copa del Rey against Barcelona. And they're a team that counter-attack extremely well and extremely well organised. What was happening earlier in the season is they were missing extraordinary numbers of chances. And you were getting situations in which post-game, Marcelino, the manager, was sitting before the journalists and just kind of shaking his head and saying, I can't explain this. I cannot explain this. I've never lived a season like it. I've never seen anything like this. And then what happened was, bit by bit, the goals came back. And they're now on course, potentially, for that final Champions League place, 3 points off. And they will be a very, very difficult side indeed for Arsenal to deal with if they are able to defend deep and run counter-attacks. And I think Arsenal obviously will be very well aware of that. Unai Emery, of course, knows Spanish football very well, will know Valencia very well, and indeed knows Marcelino very well. But I think Valencia are genuinely a good side, and I think the fact that they didn't look so good early in the season was partly circumstantial. What was strange was it was circumstantially expanded over so many weeks.
Meanwhile, Chelsea getting past Slavia Prague, albeit by a fairly narrow margin in the end, Ali. What did you make of the team that Sarri put out and their performance?
Well, what I made is that Chelsea was dominating this game and they were 4-1 up, and then they decided to say, you know what, that's it. We're done. Game over, and parking brake is on. We're just going to try to knock the ball around, and Slavia Prague, they continue to play. And in doing so, they scored a couple of goals, made it interesting. But I think big picture for Chelsea, you go through, it wasn't pretty in the end. And I think what's I'm most curious about is that does this mean that Mauricio Sarri, who had decided on playing guys like Callum Hudson-Odoi and Ruben Loftus-Cheek in Europa League, he doesn't play them today from the start? Is that then saying that they become now the Premier League team? Well, or part of the Premier League team?
Do you think he changes that, though, looking at that semi against Eintracht Frankfurt? Frankfurt getting past Benfica today. They will be stern opponents, to say the least.
I suppose so. But they are going on... There are two different things that they got to take care of. Premier League and, of course, Europa League. If I were him, I would be putting out my strongest team regardless, because I think you have a real path here in Europa League to make it into Champions League, whereas it seems a little bit more complicated and not nearly as straightforward in the Premier League.
As Ali says, they were cruising, particularly in the first half. They came into the blocks really fast. But I'll tell you what, it's a lesson that if you take your foot off the gas, as Ali said, put the handbrake on, it's very difficult to switch it around. And they were, in the end, they were sort of hanging on.
These odds, Paul, Chelsea firm favourites. Firm favourites. Eintracht Frankfurt rank out. So I'm surprised by the length of those odds. Arsenal and Valencia much closer together in terms of the odds.
Your love and appreciation of Eintracht Frankfurt is outstanding.
They're a good team.
No, look, they're a good team.
I'm not going to call them a great team. They're a good team.
Okay. All right. What do you want me to do? Are you an ultra for Eintracht Frankfurt? What do you want me to tell you? All I can... If you're going to pick out favorites here, you have to think that it's Chelsea and Arsenal. But Valencia is a dangerous team. Yeah. Eintracht Frankfurt is a dangerous team. And what may also happen here is that if Arsenal and Chelsea both are paying attention to what's going on in the Premier League and their need to get in the top four, if they take the eye off the ball of Europa League, then they may be punished. I don't think that's going to happen because once you get into the semi-finals, look, you have a real opportunity of winning this.
Maybe easier to qualify for the Champions League via the Europa League. This is how...
That's what I just said, Adrian. If you had listened to me, that's exactly what I just said. Goodness.
Had something in my ear. Premier League standings, Arsenal and Chelsea 4th and 5th. City against Spurs. Oh, yeah, they go at it again on Saturday. We will be previewing that on tomorrow's edition of the show. I hope you can join us for that. Champions League semi-final. Two halves of the bracket. The hipster side, as we discovered yesterday, involving Craig Burley and Tottenham against Ajax.
Hipster.
And then Barcelona against Liverpool. Two delicious prospects, two very different semi-finals. Sid Lowe is with us. Sid, I know you were in Porto to see Liverpool complete the job in the quarterfinals. So now it's Barcelona. Give us some sort of sense of the reaction in Spain and in Catalonia to Liverpool being the opponents in the semis.
Well, it's curious how things change, isn't it? And I suppose what that does is it sometimes tells you that the assumptions can be misplaced. When the draw was made, there was an assumption that Barcelona had got the best possible route because they would get Manchester United, who most people thought were one of the weakest teams in the competition. And yes, then they would get Liverpool, and that would probably be difficult, but at least it's better than getting, say, City or Juventus or someone who, at least on the face of it, was going to be stronger than Liverpool. And then they would reach the final and play someone very, very strong. They were worried about City, they were worried about Juventus. Both of those have gone. So now this gets repackaged as, well, Liverpool are the strongest team left in the competition. There is concern about Liverpool. But by the same token, I think there is a sense in Spain that if Barcelona are right, and in particular if Messi are right, they have to be considered favourites. Now, let's not push this too far. No one is saying Barca will go through. But they are saying if Barca get it right, they're favourites to go through. And there is also a sense that almost certainly, and again, almost certainly is the kind of phrase that makes idiots of all of us, the winner comes from this semi-final, not from the other one. And yet, of course, what Ajax have done has impressed everyone so much.
Sid, watching Liverpool in person as you did last night, I know, how do you think they match up now with a Barcelona team I know you're obviously very familiar with?
Yeah, I think Liverpool are very interesting because I think Liverpool have a variety of different ways of winning, including winning when they maybe don't always look that good. I mean, it's curious. Last night when Liverpool got the first goal, the shot count was 13-1 to Porto when Liverpool were 1-0 up. And they'd been overwhelmed, Liverpool, for the first 25 minutes or so, but they came through it and eventually won 4-1, which makes it look very, very easy. I think Liverpool have obviously, as everybody knows, added a defensive solidity to that ability to play what Klopp always calls rock and roll football. I was watching, what I was really struck by, certainly in terms of Barcelona anyway, was the first half an hour of the first leg of Liverpool against Porto and the speed and the directness and the interchange and the movement and the running of that front three. I genuinely don't think Barcelona have come up against a team that does that over the course of this season. And obviously Liverpool won't be able to keep that up for 90 minutes across both games. But I do think that there's a potential that one of these kind of Liverpool bursts, a bit like we saw against Manchester City last year, could do Barcelona an enormous amount of damage. Now, that's not to say Liverpool will go through, but I do think Liverpool are quite well equipped to make this very, very difficult indeed for Barcelona. And I almost slightly lean towards saying Liverpool might even be favourites, but it would be very, very tight.
Fascinating stuff. Let's see if the odds makers agree with you, Sid. Thanks again for your contribution. Well, the odds makers have Barcelona as slight favourites, 8-13. At Liverpool, you just about get above even 6-5 on the odds to advance to the final. Now, a fresh edition of the Serie A Awesome podcast has just dropped. You can listen to it on iTunes, our ESPN Pod Center. Gab, Paolo and Nina Razuki raking over the coals, I'm sure, of what happened in Turin will be front and centre of that podcast. Miracle, says the Dutch newspaper. By contrast, apocalypse, the Corriere dello Sport. Contrasting reactions. We were all wowed by that young, vibrant Ajax team. But in Turin, very different sort of reaction. Mina, I was struck by your tweet right at the end of the game. Really a raw tweet you set out, Juventus. Where was the anger? Where was the physicality? It was almost like they were playing against the world's greatest team, you said, and yet it was Ajax. So now how do you feel 48 hours later?
Well, I kind of just finished mopping up all the tears from that night. But I think, look, in the face of it, we have to come to terms with one thing, that this Juventus this season haven't had an identity. They haven't had a style of play. You can't really define the way that they play. And you know what? Even last season, they were relying too much on individual players coming through for them at the right moments. And you started seeing the fragility of their play under Allegri for the first time, really. Last season in the Champions League, they conceded 3 goals in Turin against Real Madrid. And, of course, they managed their comeback comeback, but it always seems like they need to prepare for a comeback because they didn't look that great against Spurs. They needed about, okay, I mean, to be fair to them, they needed about 15 minutes to come back into that game and win it. But all in all, they haven't really been playing fluent and cohesive football now for 2 seasons. They thought the missing link was to bring in Cristiano Ronaldo. But what the missing link perhaps is to just get back to playing as a team, all fighting and not needing to concede so many goals to produce a comeback when it matters.
So bottom line, Mina, does this now become a disaster of a season for Juventus?
Well, it's been the most disastrous in Allegri's tenure. Every season that he's been there, he's won the double. So he's won the Coppa Italia and the title, obviously. This season, he's going to win the title. He only needs 1 more point. But the fact that he's been knocked out of the competition despite being given Cristiano Ronaldo, the fact that they were knocked out of the Coppa Italia, the fact that they seem to be playing without personality, without fluidity, without any sense of really belonging, I think for them, this has been the worst season yet, and despite all the investments made.
Well, they're going to win the title, aren't they? But will it be much of a celebration if they win the title?
Look, there was one game in particular that kind of shows you the potential of what Juventus could be and can be. And that was the second leg against Atletico Madrid, where there was plenty of that intensity and physicality and that urgency that perhaps Mina was referring to. There was plenty of that in that match. But the problem for Juventus is that they don't do that often enough and with enough consistency. You don't expect a team like Juventus to be outplayed in the middle of midfield and manhandle and beat down the way that they were in the midfield by 3 players in La Sessione, Van de Beek, and Frankie de Jong, in a way that you just don't simply think of Juventus teams being that vulnerable. The strength of Juventus for many years, of course there's been solidity in the back line, but then you've had a physical presence in the midfield and then the ability to connect passes through the midfield. There wasn't any of that against Ajax, and they made Ajax look like a tremendous team with all sorts of ideas, with movement with and without the ball. And the concerning part for Juventus is that there was never a response. There was never a physical response. There was never a mental response. And in the end, they just let Ajax do whatever they wanted to do.
Do you think there could have been an arrogance and underestimation
so.
of Ajax, where they just sort of poo-pooed them and thought, oh, we'll just run over them? I think that sort of comes into it. It is quite remarkable when you do see the likes of Mandzukic when he's through the middle, when he's playing, you know, that power that he's got upstairs. It just frees Cristiano when he was playing on the left-hand side, coming inside on his right peg. You would think, as Ali quite rightly has said, with the creativity that they had in the middle of the park and that defensive solidity, you'd think that they would go on and on and on. I most certainly thought that they would. But to win the Scudetto is a bit of a letdown.
What's your sense, Mina? Is there some arrogance involved in this equation? Did they think they were going to be able to turn Ajax over relatively easy? Is this a team that are now just past it?
Actually, this is something that we do discuss in the Serie Awesome podcast, because it does seem like now that they understand that they have Ronaldo, they can sort of look to him to almost resolve a lot of matter, a lot of situations for them when it becomes a little bit difficult. But what I think is also extraordinary is that for a team that has been quite powerful in the Champions League, for them to mentally capitulate when they conceded the goal is something not really befitting of a big team. And that's what worries me the most. They lack so much quality in midfield. They've invested so heavily in their forward line. But yet when you look at it, they have really only one on-the-ball player, one player who can actually keep possession and perhaps deliver a pass. And he's not the most consistent one in Miralem Pjanic. If you look at Emre Can and Blaise Matuidi, you think to yourself, is this really the midfield that has the quality to deliver for Cristiano Ronaldo? And Antonio Conte once famously said that Juventus are a mediocre side unless they're running at 200 kilometers per hour. But you would think that with all the investments that they would have made, that they would have gotten a few players who can actually provide for the front line. But they haven't. You
mentioned a couple of players there, and I was going to ask you, are there any particular Juventus players that have really disappointed you, Mina?
I think Paulo Dybala has been one that's disappointed me for a few seasons now, because It seems like he can easily be scared off the ball. He doesn't know how to impose his game, and there's no real role for him. We know that he's one of the most talented that there is, but it seems like he doesn't fit into the strategy. Hopefully it was going to come through with him and Ronaldo, but it hasn't. Douglas Costa's been in and out of injury. He's a player who can produce a lot when he's on the ball, but he's not a consistent presence. And then you look at Miralem Pjanic, again, wonderful when he is at his best. But the fact of the matter is in certain matches, he can disappear. He can be completely anonymous. And when you have one player on like that in midfield who does know how to deliver a pass, then you need him to be awake and alert and able and capable at all times. And sadly for me, he hasn't been.
A couple of Champions League ago, we saw Paulo Dybala making the difference for Juventus against Barcelona. And it felt like that was going to be the moment where he took off, where that trajectory was going to be an upward one, and now the world was open for him, that there was no limit to what he could achieve. And that never really happened.
Yeah.
He never really did take off. And in fact, you can make the argument that he has taken steps back to the point to where in this game, he's taken out at halftime. In a decisive moment where you need creativity in the attack, where you need somebody to score a goal or provide a final pass or create something for Ronaldo or somebody else, Paulo Dybala, it was chosen to be out. See you later, take care. That tells me a lot as to what Allegri feels about Paulo Dybala.
Mina, I want to push on because it has been a great week all around for Italian football. Napoli crashing out at the Europa League against Arsenal. They came back with that 2-0 deficit. Lots of talk in Naples of there being an earthquake awaiting the Gunners, but it was a pretty limp exit in the end for Carlo Ancelotti's men.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, I don't think I can be that surprised. They were writing in the papers that the last time that they really saw Napoli impressing in a match was against Sampdoria, which was I think it was on the 2nd of February. That's how long ago Napoli were the force. When you saw them earlier in the season in their matches against PSG, their matches against Liverpool, you could really see the beauty of their attacking game. But they somewhat dropped off. And Carlo Ancelotti tried to go for a trident against Kiev over the weekend, a team that got relegated, so there was really no need for it, just as a way of trying to get the team back there, to get back into scoring ways. But they were just squandering opportunities. Milik had his chances, obviously, and then Callejon had a chance, but they just can't seem to really finish anymore, and their attacking play just looks very dull, reliant on too many touches, too many passes, and no longer the incisive play that we saw at the start of the season.
Great stuff, Mina. I'm going to ask you to stick around. We've got some special extra time questions coming your way. We will see if Juventus finally clinch that title. You can see it on, on ESPN Plus. Will it be their 8th in a row? They play Fiorentina Saturday at noon Eastern. Now, some midweek MLS Western Conference action. Vancouver Well, I hope the quality of the questions matches the quality of the entertainment we've seen last week. Glorious sporting carnage, I heard it referred to as.
I thought you were going to refer to the quality of the show that we had put together.
Well, that too. That was the natural follow-on from Champions League.
You don't seem convinced. You don't seem convinced.
Well, let's see if the questions do live up to it. We've got Mina and Sid with us too. Mina, I will go to you first for Joy B, who wants to know, was the Man City Spurs Champions League game the match of the season?
Oh, if we're talking about actual defensive capability, then I'm going to have to say no. But in all-time entertainment and for the drama, for the VAR, for the goals, for the technical quality when it comes to attacking football, then I think it was the most exciting match. To have that many goals in the opening 11 minutes, it was certainly my favourite of the season.
I don't think we can quibble about the defensive frailties.
Yes, we can.
Which clearly there were, but why let that spoil a good?
Well, it was remarkable when you sat watching the game, and I think everybody was texting each other saying, what's going on? I mean, what was it, 4 goals in 10, 11 minutes? It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
I just couldn't...
Who were you texting, Paul?
I was texting a lot of people.
I think he was texting Laporte, wasn't he? That explains why Laporte couldn't concentrate on the game.
I was just about to say, Sid, I mean, as a defender, you've always got to be on your toes. I mean, it was so sloppy. It was quite remarkable. And I don't know why
You're a striker, Paul. Come on, you don't care about defenders.
No, I don't. But I do know a little bit how to defend properly.
You hold back occasionally, yeah?
Because I've listened to what Nichols had to say over the years, and I have took something on board that he said. But you know, I'll tell you what. Does Pep regret putting Gundogan in the holding role, knowing no Fernandinho? I don't know. Maybe he does. I don't know. But it was just a shambles of a defensive shell.
I think what was most surprising about the fact that 4 goals are scored within 10 minutes of the game starting is the shift in momentum during the match that you don't expect to happen at this level. See, if it was my kid out there for the U10s doing it, then okay, you say, well, yeah, you can expect that to go this back and forth can happen, but not in Champions League, not in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, and not with a team like Manchester City that is a team that predicates possession of the ball, and so therefore at times taking the rhythm away from a team like Spurs because they wouldn't have access to the ball. That shift back and forth of momentum is something that I don't think Manchester City wanted a part of, and clearly Spurs took advantage of.
All right, well, VAR obviously played a massive part in the proceedings. Sid, I'll bring you in on the next question first. Sajad wants to know, do you think Real Madrid would have won 3 consecutive Champions Leagues if VAR had been introduced back then?
Well, I mean, I think in a way it's a slightly unfair question. I suspect this is probably a Barcelona fan, right? Trying to remove some of the credit from Real Madrid's Champions League successes.
Could be.
But I mean, it is worth. I mean, you know, this question can be asked basically of any European champion. But of course, we don't know what would have happened without it. But if you look at specific moments over the last 3 years when Real Madrid won the Champions League, I suppose you look back maybe at the late penalty against Juventus, but then I think VAR would have probably given that. I think you look at the Bayern Munich game in particular, where there are a couple of big questionable decisions, and maybe Real Madrid wouldn't have got through that one. I think that's probably the big one. I'm speaking from memory here without kind of going.
Yeah, there were a couple of
Bayern Munich games. Do this. Yeah, but the one in the middle of the 3 Champions Leagues, the second of the 3 Champions Leagues, when Arturo Vidal was so furious about it after the game, I think Real Madrid probably wouldn't have come through that. But then, of course, you know, as I say, you can apply this to lots of teams. You can take it, for example, to Barcelona at Stamford Bridge in 2009, and so it's very difficult to give a proper answer.
You see what Sid did there, right? So the question was about Real Madrid. So he addressed Real Madrid, but was very sure to also include Barcelona. So therefore, everything is well and balanced. That's it. All-encompassing. We cover everything. Yeah.
Would England have won the 1966 World Cup?
Yes, they certainly would.
Been introduced in 1966.
Yeah, because they won 3-2.
All right, on we go. Mina, let you take this one first. Go back to the Man City game, specifically. I can't even say it.
You okay?
Specifically.
Okay.
Pep Guardiola. Should Pep be fined by the English Premier League for continuing to wear that god-awful hoodie sweater? Asked Rick B.
I'm not sure about that, because if we're going to start fighting people for the way they're dressed, then I'm going to put up Neil Warnock. I'm going to put up sometimes, you know, the dress sense of others in the Premier League. But it's funny, actually, if there's one thing that I would like to mention if we were talking about VAR and everything that happens with Pep, it's perhaps, you know, if anything I'd like to find Pep for is why do you concede so many goals when it comes to the Champions League? Yet again, it was another defensive, and I know we don't like to talk about defences, but Liverpool, how many goals did he concede? Tottenham, how many goals? Monaco, how many goals? That's what he should really be fined for, not his dress sense.
Are those defensive foibles attributable to the hoodie sweater, is the question?
Well, if it was for good luck, and if it was superstition, well, now he has no reason to keep wearing it. There you go.
Well, he threw it off.
Great point.
It's gone now. Superstition is gone.
He threw it off, didn't he, after the last one?
He's probably getting paid a fortune to wear it. He's not bothered.
What about his...
So you be wearing it, is what you're saying?
Of course.
Oh, yeah.
What about
and you wouldn't?
Of course I would. I would have 2 of them.
What about his opponent? Is Mauricio Pochettino, asked Jeffrey, the best manager in the Premier League? Simple as that.
Well, a few weeks ago, he most certainly wasn't, when they're having a terrible time. Look, everybody questions Pochettino. You know, the first question is, Harry Kane's injured, he's not going to play again this season, or may not play again this season, so he has Son that really pops up, and he plays very, very well. Is that to do with his management style? Does he put his arm around him? What does he say? What does he do tactically? I must say, last night, when Sissoko went off, and he brought on Llorente, I thought this was going to be hands down. I thought City were going to walk all over them. But so it just wasn't the case. So, I mean, tactically, is he the best in the Prem? He's very decent, don't get me wrong.
It seems like the binary response to this. It's a yes or no.
The answer is no.
No.
He's not.
Okay.
He's very decent.
No. He's very decent. He's done a tremendous job, but the answer is no.
But he's not the best. All right. Sid, care to weigh in?
Well, that was a shock.
Yeah, I'm going to weigh in. I'm going to weigh in from a non-Premier League point of view, which is to take it beyond, or even a non-Champions League point of view, take it beyond the fact that they've just got into semi-finals, take it beyond what they've achieved and whether they've won things or not. Because of course, this is always thrown at Pochettino. Well, he's never won anything. Well, we sometimes forget that only one team can win the Premier League each year, only one team can win the European Cup each year, only one team can win the FA Cup each year. I'm going to take it away from all of that and say, as England fans, Pochettino is the best manager in England. His contribution to the England team has, and so has Guardiola's, by the way. His contribution to the England team has been enormous.
So he's not then. It's Guardiola.
A lot of young, exciting English players. Mina, is he?
I have to come in and say one thing about all of this is that when you consider how much money has been spent by the two Manchester clubs and the lack of squad depth and the way that he managed the emotions against Manchester City for Spurs, he's got to be up there when it comes to talking about the best managers in the Premier League. He may not be the best one because everyone needs a trophy to really give him that name, but for the way that he's managed the side when he hasn't had Kane, when he hasn't had Dele Alli, when he hasn't had the depth to really play and challenge on all fronts, he's certainly up there.
So I think
what about Neil Warnock?
I think what I heard there from both Sid and Mina is that no, he's not.
No.
Okay? I think that's what I heard. Because, you know, they dressed it up nicely, but they wouldn't have him as to manage their team.
Because if he was,
over some of the other guys.
If he was, Manchester United would clearly have appointed him, wouldn't they?
Well, that's a different decision altogether.
Let's not go there.
That's a very different question because, of course, Manchester United were speaking to him. And the fact that Manchester United went for Mourinho, obviously with hindsight, it's easy to say that was a mistake. But I think even at the time, a lot of people thought it was a mistake. But then, of course, look who's making the decisions at Manchester United. So I don't think that necessarily proves anything. Maybe there's another way of looking at this to say, all right, if it's not Pochettino, who is it?
All right.
Do you want Allegri?
Is he asking the question?
Yes, that question.
I will take Pep Guardiola and I will take Jurgen Klopp over Mauricio Pochettino.
Yep.
Wow.
They're the two.
Mina?
I don't know. I mean, Jurgen Klopp is a great shout considering what he's done with Liverpool, but, you know, he's also really been given the money to improve the areas that he needs. It's the money thing. I'll keep going back to it.
Who do you take, Mina? Who do you take? Who do you take? That's it. We got to come up with an answer.
Okay, it's Klopp. It's Klopp. It's Klopp.
Ah, there he is.
There's a surprise.
There it is.
There's a surprise.
Hey.
Can't believe there's no love for Brendan Rodgers. I really can't. But
he's got great teeth. Great teeth.
And on the subject of Rodgers, final thing: have any of you guys ever experienced anything paranormal?
Paranormal?
And if so, what? Paranormal? Any encounters with...
No.
Anything beyond the...
Short answer, absolutely.
Does Ajax beating Juventus count?
I am convinced that at a house that we were renting in Long Beach, California when I was playing there.
Ooh, Long Beach, California.
Yeah,
oh, hello.
I am convinced that we had little kids running around the house that did not belong to me. I am telling you...
What?
I'm telling you that there were noises in that house that I could not explain, and I could feel presences around me. And but they were friendly, though. They were friendly, and you know, I would talk to them every once in a while. Maybe I have the issue.
Was there any tequila involved in that?
No. You know, I'm all about Shirley Temples.
Hey.
Sid, can you clarify that there was paranormal activity noted in Dan Thomas's former apartment in Madrid? I believe there might have been some.
No, I think the activity going on in Dan Thomas's apartment in Madrid was abnormal, not paranormal.
That makes a lot of sense, Sid. A lot of sense.
That was Dan trying to speak Spanish, trying to learn Spanish.
Yes.
That was paranormal.
Failed.
Yep. I'm wearing those white shorts of his that he used to wear.
Oh, don't say that.
Did you have to
you got
us
any
with
pictures, Sid?
I mean, honestly, if we're saying that we've got to If we're saying we've got to ban Pep Guardiola for that god-awful jumper, Dan Thomas's shorts.
He should have been
out of it.
Should have been banned from television a long time ago.
We've got to get all of those pictures, man. We've got to do.
Oh my good grief! Thank you very much, guys. I just have memories of you ghosting in at the far post.
Oh,
that's my paranoia.
He did it.
Nice. Well done. Well done.
ESPN FC available.
You've never ghosted
every day
anywhere
on ESPN Plus.
Not that light of